In this lesson, I'm going to walk you through all of the different settings that are available to you in your app's editor. This is for customizing a lot of back-end and front-end configurations for your app. It's less about the design of your application and how things function. It's more internal stuff like the plan that your application is on, the URL that you want your application to live on, people that you want to invite to add to your application as a co-editor. I'm going to talk through each one of these sub-tabs. So all of this is within the settings main tab here. All right, and we'll start with the first one. This is the app plan tab. This is going to tell you what paid plan or the free plan that your app is on. By default, your app will start off on the hobby plan, which is the free one. You'll see your billing details, which card will be used to charge when it is on a paid plan. If you don't have that payment method created yet, there's a link here to go to your account page to add that in. And then from here, you can also change the plan. So if you start out on hobby, or if you're on another paid plan and want to upgrade or downgrade, you can do that from here. You'll choose the plan. Let's say we want to move from hobby to professional, and you'll get a list of all of the things that you can now do under that plan. Some things are tiered based on the plan that you're on. Some things are just made available for the first time on that plan. So really important to look through all of these here. Bubble's pricing page also has a nice breakdown of the different plan features. At the very bottom here, you can choose the pricing method or the interval if you want to be billed annually or monthly, and then you'll have a final button to confirm the change and begin your paid plan. Or if you're moving back to a hobby plan, then you will downgrade and you will no longer be charged. Underneath that section is this one here called Capacity Temporary Boost. This is a little abstract of a type of setting. If you don't understand what capacity is in Bubble, basically Bubble will give you a certain amount of server resources that you can use for your application. Workflows, for example, can get very complicated, and it could require more server power to have all of those workflows run from start to finish with no problems. And not cut you off. Also, a lot of activity just in general, if you have a lot of users on your application at the same time, that could really increase the amount of usage that your app is undergoing within a period of time. So every app plan will come with a certain number of units allocated to it for server usage. Now, when you first start out, you're probably not going to have an issue here. Really, when you go beyond your allowed units, you'll get an email from Bubble saying that you are reaching your max limit or that you've gone over your max limit and that you'll need to add extra units to your plan, or maybe make some adjustments to the way that you've built the application. Perhaps you've built something a little bit inefficiently. You haven't really anticipated a lot of usage, so you might need to change the way some workflow is run. A really quick example is you probably don't want to send 100,000 emails at one time. Maybe you want to spread those out over a few hours, or even, staggered over a couple of days, I guess, depending on what the email is, of course. So you can monitor how much your app is using under the logs section of your application. I don't think my menu here is going to let me click on that right now. But there are some charts there that will actually show you what your usage is. And depending on the plan that you're on, you'll have a certain number of units. You might even have a certain number of reserved units. Reserved means that it's specifically for your app as opposed to sharing those units with other apps on the Bubble servers. So this section here, just to kind of come back to this setting, is it will let you temporarily add extra units for an hour. This is so that you can test and see how many units you need to add more permanently to your application, because adding additional capacity, which happens down here, is an add-on that you have to pay for. And you can only do this once you're on a paid plan, but I believe the pricing right now, this could certainly change. Please check with the pricing page. It should also say here is $20 a month for every additional unit. It could be 20, it might be 10. And so this section up here lets you test without having to commit to paying for that extra unit for an hour and see what an extra unit will do. My recommendation for you is to start with 1 unit at a time and see if that gives you the extra amount of breathing room that your app needs to cover your workflows and your activity. Try not to add multiple units at a time, because if you start with the lowest amount, then you'll be able to see if that's enough, so that you don't end up having to purchase more than you need. You can do a boost 3 times a month, and each boost will be, I believe it's an hour at a time. So this will let you kind of test that out. And then below that is where you can actually purchase the extra capacity. Also lets you purchase extra storage. So every app gets 10 gigabytes of file storage. You can add an extra 10 gigabytes for another monthly fee as an add-on. If you have installed any plugins that are on a paid plan, so if it's a one-time payment or even a subscription, the details of that payment will be here, and you'll see what you're paying, how many times you've paid, and if you want to cancel those subscriptions. In general, too, any settings that are restricted to a specific plan type, Bubble will tell you. There will be some red text, for example, here. Certain features just aren't available on some of the lower plans, so this red text will tell you what minimum plan you have to be in order to access that feature. Well, let's go back to the General tab. This is where you have a lot of general privacy and appearance settings. This top section is all about privacy, and it's more about protecting your editor, less about protecting your database. That would happen in the data tab, in the privacy sub tab. This is where you create specific roles and permissions for users, so that some users can access specific data, other users cannot access. Maybe it's a mix where some can read, some can write. That's where you create those settings. These settings here, let me go back to my settings window. We'll go back on the General tab, is more about protecting your editor and also creating password policies for your users. So the first one up here is your application rights. I highly recommend that you keep your app as a private app as much as possible. Try not to take it off of here. The only reason you'll really want to move this to everyone can view or edit, well, there's two. The first is if you are on a hobby plan, you won't be allowed to add collaborators to your application. So if you ever need someone to look at your editor, if you're like getting help from someone on the forum, or you need just anyone to kind of co-build with you, and you're still on the free plan, that hobby plan, you'll have to move this off of a private app. Otherwise, they would not be able to access your editor. The exception to that, of course, is if they have your Bubble account login, then they can log in as you and then open up your application. That you certainly don't want to do unless you really need to. Try to keep your Bubble account to yourself, and then your app access can be changed here. Everyone can view means that the editor is in a read-only state. Nothing can be changed. No pages can be deleted. No elements can be added or updated in any way. And everyone can edit is a completely open, editable state. It's as if they own the application almost, and can change anything they want. So you really only want this if you know who's accessing it, but just keep in mind that anyone who has a Bubble account and knows the ID of your application, which is the name you gave it when you first created the app. So the ID of my app, the name of my app is Fast Track Demo. If someone knows this ID, then they could easily open up your editor, because the structure of the editor URL up here is the same for all Bubble apps. So that's why you really want to keep this on private. And if you do want to have collaborators, if you anticipate that being a frequent development strategy of yours to work with other people, then I would really recommend upgrading your plan and inviting them as collaborators intentionally. It's where you invite another Bubble user and only they have specific access to your application's editor, and you can even restrict their access to your editor through these other settings as well. Okay, so try to keep that on private app. Then you have kind of another layer of protection with a development lock. So you can actually limit the access to your application. This is the front end of your application with a username and password. This is what happens. If I select this, then I can choose a username or password. So let's say Abby developer, like that. And when I preview any page in my application, then, oh, well, let's see, this is a paid feature. Let's go over to another application where I have this enabled. All right, so this is another application where I have the development lock enabled, and this is what you see when you have that turned on. This is kind of a browser level username and password. This does not have anything to do with users that are registered on your application. This will show up no matter who you are before anything is loaded on the page. This is a way to protect the front end of your application. So you would have to enter in a username or password. That's what you dictate over here. And you can have this lock show up for your live version of your application and or your development version. What I recommend doing is always have this on, at least for the development. So if you leave this unchecked, it's going to be for both. It'll show up for both live and development. But I would say at the very least, have it for development because you should really only be allowing your team and you as the Bubble app builder access to the development preview, that front end. You really shouldn't give public access to, the work in progress of your application. This is a website. This URL, even if it's the test version, the development version, it's still accessible by anyone who has an internet connection. So it's smart to at least protect access to those pages, at the very least the development version, because that is kind of your staging ground and it's not something that you're really making public. And have that on and give the username and password to anyone that you want to give access to that development front end. Now, if you have the lock on for the live version, so if you uncheck this, it will also be showing up on the live version of the app. Just be very careful with your usage of that. I would say that you really should only have that turned on for live if your application is truly an internal tool that is not meant to be accessible by just any general public person. Let's say you're building an internal business tool for a small team in a company, and this, since this is a web app, it's accessible via web browser, but you do not want it accessible to anyone who knows the URL of that application. Of course, you can always design and create login pages for your application, and that's one way to limit access. But if you really do not want to expose any piece of the front end in any way to your live users, then you can leave this unchecked and it will show up for the live version as well. But in most cases, you're just going to have this turned on for a development mode only. Okay. And I do recommend it. I really think it's best to be as safe as possible and protect every aspect of your application. I'm going to turn this off for now. Okay, then you have the setting for defining a password policy. This is where you can create requirement criteria for the passwords that your users create to sign up to your application. We'll go through how to sign up a user in another lesson where they enter in their email and a password, but this is a back-end setting where you can create a policy so that Bubble knows their password must contain your requirements here. And you can do one of these requirements or all of them if you want. If you enable it, you have to select at least one. So let's say I want at least 6 characters, and maybe I want to require a number, and that's it. I don't care about a capital letter. I don't care about a special character. It has to have at least 6 in a number, and that's my policy. Now, the next one is redirecting users who have not changed their password. So if there is an action that you can run to assign a user a temporary password. This is used in many different scenarios. Let's say that your users have forgotten their password, and instead of sending themselves a reset link, you want to manage that yourself as an administrator, or maybe you've created more of a SaaS structure where your users are companies and they onboard their own users. And you want to allow the company managers or the team managers to control how passwords are generated for their own users. They're all users in your app at the basic level, but maybe you want to give team members and team leaders a little bit more control over how passwords are generated. So there's a way to assign temporary passwords. This setting here lets you automatically redirect someone who has been assigned a temporary password to a page that lets them create a new permanent password. Temporary password should only be temporary. We don't want it to be their forever password. Assigning a temporary password should really only be for them to recover their account. And then enabling this to automatically redirect users who have now logged in with that temporary password to a page where they can set their new password. It's a pretty smart idea. It's another way to just ensure everyone's passwords are secure and they're updated frequently. So this will let you create a page, or I should say choose a page. If it doesn't exist, you can create one and choose the page that would have that form that you design for them to reset their password. There's another layer of password protection. We've got a lot here for activating two-factor authentication. The next setting, allow to render the app in a frame or iframe. This essentially lets you allow or not allow your application to be embedded in some other application. If you've ever seen maybe a Twitter feed embedded in somebody's website, that's kind of an example of a framed website. So you could have, it's possible for some other external application to take the URL of your app and use an embed code to display your application, a page of your app, inside within their page on that external site. So you can select to block that from happening. You can allow that to happen, or you can allow it only within pages that are on your same domain. By default, this is blocked. Normally, you just want to keep this blocked. If you're doing something really specific with creating, applications that are meant to be embedded in other sites, then you'll want to allow that. But in most cases, you can leave this blocked. This setting to make a new data type private by default. This is connected to this over here. Under your data tab, we talked about this privacy sub-tab to create rules. Now, by default, all of your data types will be exposed. They will be open. Everything will be visible to every user type unless you create a new role. Now you can change this default behavior so that when you create a new data type, by default, everything is private and is not visible by everyone. So I'm going to show you how that works here. Let me go back. So if I check this box to make data types private by default, now if I go to create a new data type, let's say sample type, create, and then I go over to the privacy tab and select sample type. Then I can see that this was automatically created for me. I have in everyone else, this is the default permissions, everything is turned off. There is no access to anyone, and I have to create an intentional role to give access to specific people. If you check this box so that this happens, just keep this in mind. Remember that you have this enabled, because when you preview your page, it could be that you have not yet created the role, and it would prevent you from even viewing data because you've blocked everything off and you haven't actually said who's allowed to view data. So just remember that you've got this here, but if your application should largely be locked down, all of the data types, then this will save you some time over here on settings to automatically create private roles for every new data type. All right. And then you have a cookies setting. So by default, Bubble will collect cookies for new visitors that come to your application. This is a very important setting to keep in mind if you are anywhere in the European Union. GDPR has certain rules about cookie collection. You'll most likely want to check this so that Bubble doesn't automatically start collecting cookies, and you can present your users with a form to opt into cookies. When you check this, a couple extra workflow actions become available to you to have your users opt into cookies, and I will go over that in more detail in another lesson. Underneath the privacy section, we have some general appearance settings. This first one is an icon that will appear in your tab up here. This is a paid feature, so you won't be able to see this change until you are on a paid plan, but it is the icon that shows up in the tab up there. You will want to change that whenever you move to a custom domain. And then you have your progress bar color. Anytime you run a workflow that takes a little bit more time than a few moments, you'll see a progress bar run across the top of the page, and you can change the color of that. Also, if you are using any repeating groups, I guarantee you will at one point or another. That's an element that lets you show lists of things in your database. There's a little loading spinner icon that shows up, and this is where you can change the color of that loading icon. You have the output density of images. So this is basically a way to set the quality of images that are shown on your application. By default, it's set to 1. It doesn't mean that it's going to reduce or compress your images in a super pixelated way so that it's like blurry or anything, but there are going to be cases where you will want to increase this so that it's as sharp as possible. This does mean that the image size will be a little bit bigger. It could slow down your page load a little bit if it's having to load a much more high resolution image. So just keep this in mind. You do have this option if you notice that some images are kind of appearing blurry or just kind of out of focus, that you can increase that here, but make sure to find that balance between the resolution and also the page load speed, because it will be affected. Over here we have the expose, the option to add an ID attribute to HTML elements. This is a slightly advanced feature. If you ever need to identify elements for plugins or for other custom code that you're going to add to your page, then you will need to expose this so that you can give those elements more of an internal ID. This is different from the name of the element. I'm going to show you here when I expose this, and any element this will apply to. So I'm just going to add a text here. At the very bottom of the property editor, this will become available, this ID attribute. Again, this is an internal ID that is given to the element so that other pieces of code can, if they need to communicate with an element, they can reference that ID number. You will know when you need to access this when you're working with certain plugins. They will tell you specifically that that's what they're looking for. But by default in Bubble, there's nothing that needs to reference this. This is more if you're expanding functionality with custom code or plugins. Below that are your general services API keys. Right now, this is really for working with Google location services. So if you are using the map element, or if you're using an element called search box, which has an option to autocomplete addresses and locations, those two things are connected to Google location services. Bubble has created this integration with Google location services to make these things possible. The search box for the auto completion of addresses, and then the map element, which is a Google map element. This is connected to Google there. But to make these work, you will need to get some API keys from Google. So when you're on the hobby plan, just kind of as an FYI, these keys are taken care of for you. You're actually sharing keys with other Bubble apps that are on the free plan. Once you move onto your own domain, then you will need to get your own keys. This is just a way for Bubble to manage limits and calls to the Google API to get all of this data so that no one gets locked out, and there's not an overload of requests to Google. So when you click on these doc links, you'll get specific instructions for how to get those API keys, and you'll pop them in here. It's a free key. You don't need to pay for anything. And that will allow you to use the map and the search box properly. Again, if you're on the hobby plan, you don't really need to worry about this yet. You'll be using the Bubble shared keys. The iOS appearance settings below that are all about how different icons show up on Apple products. So you have different size icons that you can add for all of these here, and depending on the device that your app is being accessed on, those icons will be used there. Below that, you have custom fonts. Bubble's font library is actually very extensive on its own. You'll most likely find the font that you need within Bubble and not having to add a custom one. I'm going to show you here. Whenever you add anything that involves text, I'm going to remove the style and then scroll down a little bit. You can see here when I click on this, all of the fonts that are available. It's very, very extensive. These are all very popular web fonts. You're going to find a whole bunch in here, and usually it'll render the font after it's taken a moment to load in the actual styling, so you can see what it'll look like right here on its own. However, if there is a font that you want to use specifically that is not available here, you can upload that to your application in this section. I actually have a tutorial on this specifically for how to upload your custom font. So I'm going to put that in the resources area for this video so that you can see how to do that. Below that, you have your color palette. This is a way for you to create some quick shortcuts to colors that you're going to be using a lot in your application. You can see here, these are presets that Bubble has added for us. Anywhere you see a color picker, those colors will appear there as shortcuts. So I'm going to remove the style here so you can see what I mean. And I'm going to click on the color for the text, and there's my color palette down here. As soon as you make a custom choice, let's say I want this darker red or this dark, let's say I just make everything very dark here, it'll reset your palette and only show you the ones that are your custom ones. Let me click back there so you can see. Here, it removed some of the other presets in there because now that I've changed this, it's only going to show me the custom ones that I've created. But this is a nice way for you to very quickly pick colors that you're going to be using a lot in your application. Under app file management, you have some exporting tools and some cleanup tools here. So optimizing the application, this is what this is for. Your app is going to grow in size as you continue working with it. There are going to be a lot of components to it that you're not going to be using. For example, all of the styles that Bubble pre-built in there for you when you first created your app, a lot of them might go unused. And so you will see a list of all of these unused things. And it's not just styles, it's elements, it's pages, it's data types, data fields that you might have created and are no longer using. Bubble will do a check to make sure that these components are not being used in workflows or they're not designed on any page, and it'll list them all out here for you. You can select them all or select individual ones and have them completely removed from your application. This is something you really want to do fairly frequently, certainly not a daily thing, but maybe once a month, just as a regular maintenance of your application, depending on how frequently you're making changes, how frequently your app is growing by more and more elements and style. You'll just kind of have to see on your own what that frequency of cleanup is going to look like. But this will be very smart to do because you want to keep your app as lean as possible, and anything that's not being used is just dead weight. Just get rid of it. do be careful, give this thing a review, make sure that everything that is being listed here as unused is actually being unused. If there's somewhere in your app that Bubble is not picking up where something is being used, it could potentially break that thing once you remove it. So just give this a double check. Bubble does a really good job of picking out all of the unused things, but never hurts to check over it once or twice before you fully clean out the app. I do want to point out that when you delete fields from your application, for example, over here, or data types. Let's see, I deleted some fields here from the user type. You'll see this show up here, show deleted fields. When you click on that, it'll present those to you. They become visible again, but you can restore them. So technically, when you delete fields, they are available to restore. So they're still technically in your app, even though they're not, an actual field that you're using actively. So that cleanup action will remove these deleted fields as well and permanently delete them from the application. Okay, so that's what optimize means. Do it regularly. It doesn't need to be a daily thing, but every once in a while to make sure your app is lean. Then once you're on a paid plan, you have these two buttons that become available. One to export your Bubble application to a Bubble native Bubble file, and then an import button to import any native Bubble files into the application that you're working with. So what does that even mean? So basically, Bubble apps are built with custom Bubble code. You cannot export a Bubble app and then use it on WordPress. You cannot export a Bubble app and then transfer it to Squarespace or Wix or any of those other website builders. You can only build Bubble apps to be used on Bubble. Okay, so exporting an app and importing an app does not mean you're exporting an app to use on another platform, nor does it mean you're importing another platform's code to be used inside of Bubble. This is only for reference, really. Let's say that you've created app A, and maybe your partner has another Bubble account with a blank app B in his account. Okay, so you can export your app and he can import that app into his account in his app that's already created, and everything will be added in there. All of the designs, the styles, everything like that. That's an okay transfer of the Bubble app file because it's going from Bubble app to Bubble app. But really what most people are using this function for is for backups. So exporting an application will export all of the setup of your app, the data types, the styles, the design, in that point in time, save it somewhere safe. It's a regular file that you can save on your computer. If something goes wrong and you need to recover your application, you have this external file that's saved somewhere, and you can import it in a new app if needed to recover it that way. So mainly for reference, a smart thing to do for backups every once in a while as well. All right, let's go over to the domain and email tab. So over here, once you are on a paid plan, you can set up your custom domain. This is the URL that your app will live on. So it's, mine is coachingnocodeapps.com. Maybe yours is myawesomeapp.com or myawesomeapp.edu, whatever it might be. You will set up the domain name here. Bubble has an integration with Google Domains. If you have not yet purchased your domain on with any service, you can do so with Google Domains. There's lots of different domain hosts out there. Google Domains is one, GoDaddy is another one, Bluehost is another one. There's a bunch of them. You can kind of shop around. Google Domains is really great. They make things very easy and their pricing is very competitive too. So if you have not yet purchased, you can do that through this link and it'll all kind of happen automatically. Or if you've already purchased your domain, once you're on a paid plan, you'll enter that domain here. and then click to set up the domain. And many times it's an instant connection. There's nothing else you need to do. Sometimes there will be extra instructions for you to update your settings with your domain provider, right? So sometimes you might need to update the DNS records on your domain provider. Bubble will give you specific instructions. They'll show up here in the bottom to show you what to do and how to verify that you've done it properly. And you'll get a very clear message saying that your domain is connected and ready to go. All right. Once you have connected your domain, you can then customize the sender address for any emails that get sent from your Bubble application. So an example workflow, let's say we have a button on our app page here, and this button is send email, and we'll start a workflow with this button. And the action for this button, when it is clicked, is to send an email. I'm going to go to the email action here. All right, so let's say we fill this out. Someone clicks on that button and this email goes out to the recipient. We fill in here and with all of the information there. Now, by default, the sender address, the sender name and address that the recipient will see, it will say no reply it'll be like a no reply address on the Bubble domain. So you can customize the sender address to come from your domain with the settings that show up here. Let me actually open up a different application so you can see what this area looks like with the setup already done. Okay, so here is an example application with the domain already in place. Coaching No Code Apps is there. You can see that it's ready to go. And then below you have these email settings. You can see that Bubble has an integration with SendGrid, which is an email service provider. You can get an API key from them. You can also have a free plan with them, depending on the amount of emails you plan to send, or you can get on a paid plan to send more emails. But you'll get an API key to connect to them so that you can connect your custom sender email address and have all emails route through this service provider and use your sender address as the sender rather than the Bubble no reply default. You certainly want to take ownership over that. It'll make your application look much more professional when you do that. And you can also adjust the sender name as well. So, you know, instead of, if I didn't want it to say Gabby, maybe I can say support, even though the address alias here is Gabby. I have complete control over there. And then you can redirect all requests to your default domain, which is the Bubble domain, to your custom domain. So no matter what, when someone goes to your original Bubble hosted domain, the one that's on the free plan, they will always be redirected to your main one. If you leave this unchecked, that means your application is also accessible on the Bubble hosted domain. So again, if you, I recommend that you keep this checked as soon as you have the custom domain plugged in there. And then your final setting here is to enable SSL encryption. That's the thing that makes your the front of your URL here say HTTPS rather than HTTP. You definitely want to have this on. It creates an encryption layer of security for your website. Search engines like Google and Bing, they really like it when you have this turned on. They see your site as a more secure site. They won't show an error to the user saying, hey, the site doesn't look safe. Are you sure you want to enter? You really don't want that to happen. So make sure you check this box here. This will become available once you do have your custom domain set up. By default, all Bubble hosted apps, you know, when you're on the Bubble domain or if you're on the hobby plan, they will already have SSL tied to it. But when you're on your custom domain, you'll need to manually check this box. For languages, let's go back over to the test app. This is where you can set up translations for the system messages that Bubble has. So there's a long list of alerts and warnings and confirmations that Bubble will display for a certain set of actions. Most of them have to do with user registration, whether their password is correct or incorrect, or if the user already exists with a certain email. Bubble will show these messages in its own little alert window. You do not have to design that. Of course, you can override that, and I will show you how to do that in another lesson. But these are all of the messages that show here. Now, if you are going to translate your application into other languages, you have a way to customize and tell Bubble what language each user should view these messages in. So if you change the language over here, let's say we'll change this one to French, the messages for these system ones are already translated for you, which makes it very, very, very handy. But you can also create your own texts to save here so that you can translate your own text. That I will cover that in another lesson, but just to point out that this is the section where you will manage those things and also manage the language that a user should be seeing. This is a custom setup that you'll have to create in order to tell Bubble what language that user is. And then the application primary language is mainly for you as the app owner, how you want to see everything in Bubble appear, what the default languages for your users' system messages should be. You can change those by clicking that there. By default, English is the language for the primary. Now over to SEO and meta tags. This is where you can add in titles and descriptions for what will be shared in social networks. If you want to share a page on your application on Facebook or Twitter, for example, you can put in the title of your application, a description, and also a picture that will show up in the thumbnails. That's all here for you to enter there. Then you have a couple more advanced SEO settings. If you are comfortable with SEO and you're familiar with the different configurations, like customizing your robots file, you can enable those here to add those in. If you're not, I would leave this turned off. I do recommend you expose a sitemap file so that Google and other search engines can properly index your application's pages and understand which ones it needs to pay attention to, because you can leave some turned off so that they can be ignored. But this is, if you're familiar with SEO settings, there are a couple of options here for you to play around with. With advanced settings, as the title suggests, this is an area that you only want to mess with if you know what you're doing. You can enter in your own custom JavaScript here or CSS code, either in the header of your application or in the body of your application. And for those of you who are familiar with this type of thing, if you're looking for a page level area to enter in code, you'll want to do that on the page itself. When you go to the property editor for the page, if you scroll down, there's an area there to enter code into the page's header rather than the application's header. And then for the body, you'll just add an HTML element here and add that to the page, and you can customize HTML on your own that way too. All right, so I'm going to get rid of that for now and go back to our settings. Now at the bottom of this section are a couple more advanced settings for you. The first one is 301 redirections. You really only need to mess with this if you need this feature. This is to point old pages that you no longer want being accessed to the new versions of those pages. They would be completely new URLs, kind of like a forwarding feature. So you need to be on a paid plan to access this feature. And then below that, also a paid feature. This is to host extra files in the root directory of your application. An example of this is if you wanted to upload your own custom sitemap or an RSS feed, you can do that by adding those files here. The next section in our settings tabs is your API settings. I'd say that the first place that you'll look here in this section, or the first feature you'll want to work with, is your public API endpoints. So by default, these are not exposed. When you expose your workflow API, for example, when I check that, then I will have this section appear in my page list dropdown. This is where you can create server-side workflows that has no attachment to any front-end design. This is all background workflows that the user does not have to be present for. This is where you can create scheduled workflows to happen in the future, recurring workflows to happen on some frequency, monthly, weekly, daily. There are different options for that, and generally run really big, heavy workflows that process through a lot of data at one time. It's best to put those on the server side, and it works very much like the workflows for your regular pages, but in this context, the workflow events are known as endpoints, and if you are familiar with APIs at all, that word should be a familiar term for you. That's really the location, the address of that particular workflow. But it does work very much like your regular workflows. You'll create an endpoint, and then you have most of the actions available to you to run on the server side. So you do have to enable that setting to expose your workflow API in order to get this section of your application. Keep in mind that API workflows are another paid feature. All right, and then for data API, this is probably going to be less common, but it allows external services to access your database via API. If you need this, then you'll likely be familiar with APIs in general. Just know that you need to expose this to give access to external services. By default, this is turned off. When you turn this on, you will see extra settings in your data privacy rules we need to expose for specific types too. So I've got to choose at least one of these that I want to expose. So I want to expose the event data type here, and then I go over to data and privacy and select event. Let's say we create a new role called admin. Now you'll see there are these fields down here that we hadn't seen before. We've already gone through this section a little bit. These weren't there before because I didn't have this exposed in the API setting. So this gives you even more control over what someone can do with this data type via API. Right, very important. By default, this is all turned off because Bubble wants to keep things locked down as much as possible for you, and you should only expose it if you need it. So I'm going to uncheck that. And also uncheck this. The next section down here, this is to allow another third-party service to log into their application with your Bubble apps credentials. This is not something you're probably going to do very often, but if you think about, logging into some app with your Facebook credentials, that's what we're creating here. If you're familiar with single sign-on and you know that you need this type of functionality, this is the area where you will select which page has that login form on your application. And when you do create a sign-on flow like this, you will need to add a separate third-party app here so that you can generate keys for those services to use to properly authorize themselves with this single sign-on flow. All right, so I'm going to delete that for now. At the very bottom here, we have settings for Discourse single sign-on. This is if you want to create a forum using the Discourse platform. This is the platform that Bubble uses for their own forum. It's a specific platform. If you want to use something else, then this really won't apply to you. This is really if you're going to use Discourse. These are a handful of settings that are needed to make that connection. So that you can have something like forum.myawesomeapp.com and have a user forum through that platform. And if you click on this link here, there will be more instructions for how to set that up. At the very bottom is another advanced tool for generating an authorization key for working with external services that require this specific type of key. The next tab is the collaboration tab. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but this is a professional plan minimum requirement. This allows you to invite other Bubble users to access your app's editor so they can actually create and build and edit your app along with you. You can decide what type of access they get to the editor. Perhaps they only can access the development version. Perhaps they can only view the data and not actually edit it. That's up to you. When you invite a user, you'll enter in their email here and hit invite. All right. When you want to transfer ownership of your application where it's no longer under your Bubble account, you'll hit the transfer button. This is kind of a hidden feature here. It's not very clear that it can be found under collaboration. But if you ever need to if you ever want somebody else to own the application and you are no longer paying for it, or you just don't want to have it under your account and give it to somebody else, this is what you'll use as transfer. But otherwise, if you're inviting collaborators, you'll want to use the invite button here. This little checkbox here will show you or will allow Bubble to show you a little message on the left-hand side here. It'll show up in yellow if other users are in the editor at the same time as you. It'll have their email address. If you have multiple collaborators in here at the same time, then you'll see a bunch of messages there in different colors, so you can see who else is in the editor with you. Just a quick note that if you are editing your application with other people, make sure you communicate with each other, because every time you make a change to your application, you will get this message as you preview it at the top. Let me just show you here. If I move this, you'll see this message here that the page will need to be refreshed. Doesn't matter if it was you making the change or somebody else. If there was a change and you had this preview page open, you're going to be forced to refresh. So make sure you communicate with your team so that you're collaborating in an efficient way. The next tab is sub apps. So if you are on the team plan or higher, this is one of the higher enterprise plans available, then you can create a sub app structure. This is more if you are looking to build a SaaS type of application where you have a primary application that then gets copied over to multiple child applications. They're all kind of clones of each other. The benefit of this type of structure is that every sub app is independent. They have their own database. The data is not shared. They can live on their own domain. And all of the settings and configurations will be unique to each individual application, but they all are modeled after that primary parent application. So again, it's more for SaaS structures. This is on the team plan or higher. The way that works is you pay for the primary application. It has to be on the team plan, and then all of the sub apps can be on their own lower plan if you want. They don't all have to be on the team, but they do have to be on some paid plan, and they are paid individually. So you are paying for each additional sub plan on top of the parent primary app. There is going to be an entire lesson dedicated to creating this structure and all of the rules and strategies that you need for this type of setup. The last tab in this settings area is your versions tab. I'm going to actually switch over to another app where we can see the history of versions a little bit here. This is a feature that Bubble implemented in early 2018, where Bubble is now letting users choose when to upgrade their apps to a new Bubble version. Usually a new version is released when features in Bubble have changed so much that it'll change behavior, default behavior. For example, there was a version that handled dates and times very differently, mostly to improve the accuracy of doing calendar math. So adding a month to February 1st will take you to March 1st rather than a flat 30 days later, because there are only 28 days in February. So things like that, where the the underlying behavior of something in Bubble has changed so much that if you were to adopt it, it might affect things that you've already created. So they're going to give you the option to review before you upgrade to that new version, make any necessary changes so that you have less of an impact, things don't break, and then you can choose to upgrade. This doesn't happen very often, but it is something to keep in mind. Try to stay on the latest version as much as possible. There is an entire module in Fast Track that will cover every single version update as they come out. There will be a new lesson that covers what the change was and what you should look out for before you upgrade. So that was a look at all of the settings in your Bubble editor. There is a lot of them, obviously. Take your time as you go through them. Not all of them are going to be applicable at the same time. Some of them you can completely ignore. So hopefully this has helped you understand a little bit better how to configure all of these settings for your apps editor.